Hi there, this is Dr. Embody. We're going to take a look at project 2 here. This is an exercise in using looping, a lot of while loops here, and conditionals, if, and so on, and of course the booleans that control those. And what we have here is the classic how do you make change. And what I want to do is rather than show you any code, talk to you a little bit about how you problem solve this. And what you want to do is break the problem down into smaller pieces until you get to the point where you have something that's easier to work with. For example, each of these, like the test cases, you have the cost of something, and then you have a dollar amount associated with that, so that's paid for. And here, just to make life easier, you always just pay in integers of dollars. And I'll suppose an item costs $1.33, and you pay with $2. That leaves 67 cents change. I know you guys can figure that part of it out. So I want to start with the 67 cents change. How many quarters, how many dimes, how many nickels, how many pennies do I get out of that? Now the way to do this is to work it out on paper first. And this part, when we're not talking about any Python, is something we encourage you to do with somebody else. So sit down with a piece of paper and work out how you solve this. And I want to show you how I went about getting started on that. So let's take a look at what I did. So we're starting with 67 cents, all right? And I'm going to call that my difference. That's the difference between the amount, the $2 that's paid, and the $1.33 of that the item cost. All right, so it's 67 cents, which I am doing as an integer. All right. Now, as we mentioned in the project, we do the greedy approach, which is, first of all, you figure out how many quarters there are, and then you figure out how many dimes there are, and so on. And so we're going to start with quarters, all right, which we specify you start with 10 quarters. Now, how many of those quarters are going to use in the change? So I'll call it quarters change. All right, and of course that starts out with 0. So how do we figure out that there is that there are any quarters in here? Well, we know that this 67 is bigger than 25, so there's got to be a quarter in there, right? So let's take out a quarter's worth. On my feet, 65 minus 67 minus 25 leaves 2. 7 minus 2, that leaves 42. Whew. Okay, so we did 1 quarter. So now we have 9. And we started with 0 quarters that we're handing out for change, and so we add 1 onto that. And now I have, I've taken care out of my 67 cents. I have 42 cents remaining. I've used up 1 of my quarters, and I have 1 quarter in change. So we can take a look at my 42. Hey, that's bigger than 25, so we have another quarter's worth in there. And if I can do my arithmetic right, 17, and so we had 9 quarters. We just used another one. And we had 1 quarter in our change, and now we have 2. Now we can look at this 17, and we see, aha, no more quarters needed there. So now we can, because we're using the greedy approach, we can now look at dimes. So we're going to be using tens, and so we're going to say 17, and we're going to take away 1 dime, and that leaves me 7 cents. And so now my dimes, we started with 10, we just used 1, now I have 9 dimes, and I have change, dimes and change. 0 plus 1 is 1. Notice how we got to take care of all of these a step at a time. So now I have a 7. How many dimes are left in the 7? And the answer is none. So now we start working on nickels. Okay, so we worked with the nickels, and now I have 2 left over. There's no nickels left in that, so we're dealing with pennies. And we have pennies change. And then when I take away the 2 pennies, we have 0. And what's my change? Well, there are 2 quarters, a dime, a nickel, and 2 pennies. And then, presumably, I'm done making change for my 67 cents initially. So what do I do next? Well, now there's a few things I can do here. One is that I could have looped through all the quarters, looped through the dimes, looped through the nickels, and so on. Or I could have had a loop here where I go and just go through and see if I need to take a quarter out or a dime or a nickel and so on. And what's controlling this loop if I do it that way? Well, one way I can do this is to check. I keep looping while my diff is greater than 0. Once it becomes 0, I'm done. So you really have two approaches. Do a big loop, check for quarters. Oh, do I need a quarter? Do I need, if not, can I use a dime? If not, can I use a nickel? If not, can I use a penny? And I keep doing that. And in this case, I would have grabbed a quarter, gone through, grabbed another quarter. Oh, there isn't room for a quarter. So now we do a dime, come back, still have something left there. No quarters, no dimes, and a nickel, and so on. And I can build a loop up this way to go through and make my change. So there's really kind of 2 approaches here. We can go through and grab all the quarters, grab all the dimes, grab all the nickels, grab all the pennies. That works. Or you can have a bigger loop and grab 1 coin at a time in here. 1 coin each time through the loop. And it doesn't matter which way you do that. They both work fine. It's just sort of how you look at the problem. And notice here, there's a little bit of Python in here, and because I use the word while, so okay, so there is a line of Python. But the rest of this, I'm talking about this, without talking about any Python, and I have sketched out an algorithm without talking Python. There's some arithmetic in there, and you can imagine some checking of things, but there are ideas about how to approach this without actually talking Python, and this is the kind of thing we encourage you to talk about with somebody else. Now, of course, I started after I'd figured out that it was 67 cents a change. I think you can do that part. Then we go and calculate how many pennies, nickels, and so on. Notice I gave you in the setup nickels, dimes, and pennies, you can see here I have new variables. So I got to keep track. I got to keep track of a lot of stuff. And notice that these guys never get reinitialized to 0. But if I go and get another instance of making change, well, clearly my change has to go back to 0. So there's a fair amount of complexity here. I encourage you to do this a little bit at a time. When I built this, what I did is I just went through and figured out how many quarters there were. All right, make this problem smaller. Notice how I've made this problem smaller in 2 ways. One is I said, well, let me just start with a change, and I'll look at that. And then when I started programming it, and whether I'm doing it, this kind of algorithm or that kind of algorithm, I just first went and I said, how many quarters? And then I tested that. I tested it with a few different values here. And then once I got the quarters worked out, well, you can practically use copy and paste, changing some values there, and create all the others. This allowed me to focus on part of it, and once I figured out the details of that, hey, the rest of it was pretty easy. So break your problem down into smaller pieces, and I encourage you to think about that. That'll make your life a lot easier, and figure out how to try out and test these smaller pieces. So hopefully that'll give you an idea of how to get started. Good luck.